The day my brother mocked me for being a secretary, he didn't know I was hours away from signing a $50 million deal as CEO of the very company outmaneuvering his empire. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about how silence can become your sharpest weapon, and how the underestimated can rewrite the rules. The chandeliers glittered like constellations overhead, casting golden reflections across the marble floor of the downtown Seattle ballroom. Laughter floated above the clink of wine glasses, expensive perfume hung in the air. And every face around me was painted with the gloss of power and pride. It was the annual Reed Family Gala, an event drenched in status, tradition, and unspoken rivalry. I stood near the edge of the room, half shadowed by a towering pillar. I had always preferred the fringes to the spotlight. Not out of fear, but strategy. When you're invisible, no one notices the fire you're building. My name is Ethan Reed, 30 years old, and tonight to them I'm still just the Reed family's quiet failure. Across the room, my older brother Alexander held court with a circle of shareholders and socialites. His laugh was big, theatrical, and designed for attention. He was the chosen one, the golden heir to Carter Investments, our family's multi-million-dollar empire. I was the one they forgot to mention unless they needed a punchline. And tonight, Alexander delivered it with precision. "Still just a secretary, Ethan," he called out loud enough for a dozen heads to turn. A ripple of polite chuckles followed. Someone near him muttered something I couldn't hear, and more laughter echoed. Alexander raised his glass in mock salute. "Hope you're keeping those coffee orders on track. We wouldn't want the corporate world to collapse." My jaw clenched for the briefest moment. I smiled. Not wide, not warm, just enough. "Doing my part," I said, my voice calm, measured. Alexander grinned and turned back to his audience, already bored with the exchange. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning at precisely 9 o'clock, I would sit across from the executive board of Parker Industries and sign a $50 million contract that would save their company and sever Carter Investments' last grip on the deal. Carter had spent months circling Parker like a vulture, whispering buyouts, applying pressure, low-balling the family-run medical supplier until it was cornered. Alexander thought it was a done deal, so did my father Raymond. They believed the ink would dry with their name on the signature line. They had no idea I was the one standing in their way. For now, I let them laugh, let them underestimate me. It had always been this way. I scanned the room, noting the familiar faces. Raymond, my father, speaking with the mayor, his posture straight, his voice smooth like polished granite. He hadn't acknowledged me since I walked in. My mother Margot sat at a table with two senators' wives, smiling thinly, nodding at things she barely heard. If she saw me, she didn't show it. Every Reed in the room fit their role, dominant, loud, present. Except me. And yet none of them had built anything without the Reed name stamped in gold across the top. I had. I glanced down at the cuff of my suit, simple dark gray, tailored but unassuming. It wasn't designer. It didn't need to be. It fit, like I finally did. 8 years ago, this room had swallowed me whole. Back then, I stood at the center, clutching slides of a startup idea I believed could change everything. I pitched my vision for an AI firm that could help small businesses survive in a cutthroat economy. My hands shook. My voice cracked. I was 22, green but burning with purpose. They laughed. Alexander dismissed it as a college fantasy. My father offered me a desk job. My mother told me to be realistic. No one in that room saw what I saw. I had walked out of that penthouse ashamed, and in that shame something hardened. Tomorrow that thing would roar. A server approached with a tray of champagne. I took a glass, sipped slowly. The bubbles hissed against my tongue. I could feel the thrum of the city outside the ballroom's tall glass windows, Seattle moving, breathing, unaware of the quiet war I was about to win. Kelly texted, "Final draft ready, all green on Parker's side." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, heart steady. "Let them talk," I whispered under my breath. "Because tomorrow I speak, and they'll finally have to listen." I still remember the echo of my footsteps as I crossed the marble floor of the Reed penthouse. The evening light had just begun to fade over Seattle, casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I was 22, armed with nothing but an idea, a stack of slides, and the fragile belief that my voice might matter. The dining room had been cleared for the presentation. A mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by sleek chairs filled with family raiment at the head. Alexander already lounging, glass in hand, flanked by our cousins and uncles. Margot sat near the center, quiet, her posture perfect, eyes distant. And at the far end, Florence Reed, my grandmother, sat like a monarch, silent, observant, ancient yet attentive. I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector, and took a breath. "Thank you for being here. I know I don't usually take the floor like this, but I have something I believe in." The first slide glowed onto the wall behind me. Luminary Labs, an AI-driven platform to help small businesses analyze costs, optimize operations, and survive in a shifting economy. It was a culmination of every late-night brainstorm, every note scribbled on coffee-stained napkins, every lecture I'd internalized and reshaped. I made it to slide 3 before the first interruption. Alexander leaned forward, eyes gleaming with amusement. Wait, AI? What are you now, the next Zuckerberg? Come on, Ethan." A few stifled laughs around the table. My father didn't even look up. His fingers tapped his tumbler of scotch with an impatience I'd known since childhood. "If you're looking for a job, Ethan Carter's HR can get you something in operations," Raymond said. "No need to reinvent the wheel." My mouth went dry. I pressed forward. "This isn't a hobby, Dad. I've run the numbers. There's real need." "Real need," Alexander echoed. "For coffee, maybe you should start with something you're already good at." Laughter again, sharper this time. Margot finally spoke. "It's nice that you're thinking outside the box," she said, eyes not meeting mine. "But perhaps your talents are better suited to something stable." I turned slightly desperate for a lifeline. I looked at Florence. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't even blinked. Her expression was still, but there was something in her gaze, sharp, focused, curious. But she said nothing. I stood through 20 more minutes of questions that weren't questions, comments that were thinly veiled insults. Alexander mockingly asked if the AI would also help him pick out ties. One uncle asked whether it could make his coffee. It was a firing squad dressed in dinner jackets. I ended the presentation early. When I packed up my slides, no one looked at me, except Kelly. Florence didn't smile, didn't frown. She just watched me. And as I turned to leave, she gave a single nod, barely perceptible. But I saw it, and I held on to it like a thread in a storm. That night, back in my apartment, a single-room walk-up above a faux restaurant, I stared at my slides and felt something collapse. Not the dream. The belief that my family would ever believe in me. That maybe for once I'd say something worth hearing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat at my desk and started tearing it all down, every assumption, every angle. I rewrote the business model, simplified the tech stack, changed the user interface, and started coding from scratch. By sunrise, I had a prototype. Rough, functional. My fingers hurt. My head throbbed. But it worked. Over the next few weeks, I lived off ramen and instant coffee. I pitched the concept to anyone who would listen: corner store owners, laundromat managers, even food truck vendors. Most shook their heads. Some smiled kindly, others didn't bother. But a few asked questions. One bookstore in Tacoma took a chance. I worked day and night adapting the software, tailoring it to their inventory system, analyzing their ooze trends and helping them make informed stocking decisions. Within 3 months, their numbers rose by 15%. Word spread slowly, but it spread. A gym in Everett reached out, then a bakery in Bellevue. Each time I learned something new made the system more intuitive, more robust. Luminary Labs became more than a name. It became a whisper of hope in an economy that chewed up the little guys. I signed every contract as E. Reed. I avoided photos, declined interviews, and rejected offers to scale prematurely. I wasn't building for fame. I was building to survive, to prove that I could, that I was not who they said I was. My apartment was small, but it became my war room. The PO restaurant downstairs provided heat and occasional comfort. I had taped a printed screenshot of Florence's nod above my desk. Every time I doubted myself, I looked at it. She saw me. No one else had, but she did. And that was enough to keep going. One night, 6 months later, I received a call from a regional chain, 7 stores. They wanted to pilot the system. I negotiated my first 5-figure deal. I didn't call home. Didn't need to. I was becoming someone they would no longer ignore. And it all started the night they laughed. The office was no more than 2 rooms stacked above a tired little cafe on 3rd and Pine. The sign outside flickered, 1 letter permanently burnt out. Inside, the floors creaked and the radiator hissed like a bitter old man. But to me it was sacred. It was mine. Luminary Labs wasn't a company yet. It was an idea clinging to breath. I chose the name for what it meant: light. Light in a world that had only shown me shadows. I furnished the office with mismatched chairs I found on Craigslist and a second-hand desk with scratches so deep they could tell stories of their own. A donated coffee maker sputtered to life each morning while I ran test after test on my software. The quiet hum of code, the clack of keys, the occasional grumble from the espresso machine downstairs. This became the rhythm of my life. I worked through the nights, slept on a thrifted futon in the back room, and showered at the gym down the street. I had no funding, no safety net, and no name to protect me. That last part wasn't entirely true. I had a name. But it was one I kept hidden. I signed every email, every proposal, every contract as E. Reed Consultant. It was vague enough to imply experience, professional enough to command curiosity, but ambiguous enough to shield me from scrutiny. If anyone searched for Ethan Reed, they'd find the failed Reed son who never quite fit into Carter Investments. But E. Reed. He was a ghost. The first breakthrough came with a call from a woman named Joy, owner of a bookstore in Tacoma that was months from closing. She'd heard through a friend that I did something with AI and was desperate enough to give anything a shot. I drove out in my beat-up sedan laptop, riding shotgun, heart pounding. Joy greeted me with wary eyes and stacks of unsold novels. Her margins were razor thin and her inventory was a mess. I spent 3 weeks buried in her numbers, cleaning spreadsheets, tweaking algorithms, writing code tailored to her needs. When I showed her how the system could predict seasonal demand, streamline orders, and track performance in real time, her eyes welled up. "Ethan," she whispered, "this could save me." 3 months later, her revenue was up by 22%. Word spread quietly, organically. Next came a bakery in Bellevue, then a gym in Everett. I never sought publicity. Every contract was signed under E. Reed Consultant. Each time I handed over a solution, I walked away with a little more data, a little more trust, and a little more resolve. Luminary Labs was becoming something more than code and coffee. It was a sanctuary for businesses on the brink. And for me, it was freedom. I could move unseen, undisturbed, and unjudged. Sometimes I wondered if my family had heard whispers. If someone at Carter Investments had raised a brow at the string of deals they'd lost to a nameless firm. But I knew they hadn't connected the dots. If they had, they would have come for me. They would have tried to buy me out, shut me down, smear me. So I kept quiet. I wasn't just building software, I was building armor. And the light from that flickering cafe sign, every night it shone a little steadier. On weekends, I would walk through neighborhoods Carter Investments ignored: the immigrant-owned shops, the struggling laundromats, the corner delis buried in rising rents. I watched. I learned. I took notes. These weren't just potential clients, they were stories waiting to be salvaged. And in my solitude, I found a rhythm, a strength that didn't come from applause or funding rounds or LinkedIn accolades. It came from impact. Quiet, powerful, real. The name E. Reed was becoming whispered currency among small business owners. Mysterious, effective, and always one step ahead of the predatory offers from firms like my father's. Every contract I signed was one step closer to a reckoning they couldn't see coming. And I was just getting started. Lessons in silence. Family events were the kind of ordeal that tested my patience more than any bug in my code ever could. The Reed family calendar was a well-oiled machine of appearances: barbecues in the Hamptons, wine tastings in Woodinville, ski weekends in Aspen. Each event a reminder that belonging was conditional, and that my seat at the table came with a side of mockery. Alexander's voice always led the charge. "Still pushing paper? Ethan thought you'd have moved up to printing the coffee orders by now." Laughter followed, light and harmless to everyone but me. My uncle would chime in about his latest merger, my cousins comparing bonuses, all while I nursed a soda and a forced smile. Every gathering I absorbed it, and every insult became instruction. I watched how they wielded power in conversation, in silence, in the way they leaned back when speaking to someone they deemed lesser. There was an art to their cruelty, a rhythm to their indifference. I didn't belong, but I was learning. The lesson wasn't how to fight them. It was how to build something so quietly unshakable that they wouldn't notice until it was too late. And then there was Kelly. We met at a low-key tech meetup in Capitol Hill. A room full of code slingers and dreamers chewing pizza and debating frameworks. Kelly stood out not because she was the loudest, but because she asked the kind of questions that cut through fluff. When I presented a concept sketch of an AI auditing module, she came up after and said, "You're solving something real. Most of them just want funding. You want function." She was right. I hired her the next day. Not as a partner, not even with full context, just a contractor who would come in twice a week to build what I couldn't build alone. I told her we were helping a few small businesses, no names, no family history. She didn't push. Maybe she sensed there was more. Maybe she had ghosts of her own. Kelly didn't flinch when I asked her to use only burner emails. She didn't ask why every client had to sign an NDA. She saw the outlines of something clandestine and chose to trust the vision instead of probing the motive. Together we made Luminary Labs real. She handled back-end architecture while I pitched and troubleshot. We sat in mismatched chairs under the hiss of a fluorescent light, drafting contracts and debugging code like some underground revolution. The more I remained silent, the more I saw. Silence didn't mean weakness, it meant choice. Power. When a family friend opened a dog grooming shop and almost signed a predatory lease tied to Carter Investments, I intervened under a false name. Our software shaved enough operational cost that she didn't need the loan and declined the offer. She never knew the connection. Neither did my cousin Timothy, who called me during a particularly rainy November night drunk and meandering. "Heard you're still with that, what is it again, consultant gig, still there?" I said. He laughed. "Stick with it, man. At least it's stable." Stable. That was the word they used when they thought someone had settled. What they didn't know was that I'd quietly outmaneuvered their firm in 3 separate cities. Kelly and I mapped every Carter acquisition. We saw patterns target small, desperate family-run businesses, swoop in with help, then gut them. Our mission clarified. This wasn't just software anymore. It was sabotage, rescue, justice. But we said none of that aloud. Every family dinner became another rehearsal in restraint. Every toast to Alexander's promotions was another vow I made silently to be better, to do more, to dismantle their empire brick by arrogant brick. And they never knew. Because I never told them. That was my greatest lesson: when they overlook you, they never see you coming, the invisible knife. Every silent victory became sharper, more precise. By the time Luminary Labs had saved its 5th struggling business, I no longer saw it as revenge. I saw it as redemption, mine and theirs. Each small shop I rescued from the jaws of Carter Investments was a reminder that people mattered more than margins. One was a bookstore in Tacoma run by an elderly couple who had seen stories for 40 years. When I optimized their inventory and overhauled their order tracking, they wept at the sudden rise in revenue. Their thank you letter came weeks later, handwritten in trembling cursive. "You didn't just save our store, you saved our marriage. We had nothing else." A month later, I helped a bakery in Bellevue that was on the brink of foreclosure. The owner, a single mother named Denise, had nearly signed a deal with Carter's subsidiary disguised as an angel investment firm. When we stabilized her profit margins, she sent me a photo of her daughter's birthday cake, baked fresh, debt-free. Each letter, each smile chipped away at something inside me. The bitter shell that had grown since that disastrous family meeting began to crack. I still burned to outmaneuver Carter Investments, but now it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to someone else that their trust in me hadn't been misplaced. That someone was Florence Reed. My grandmother had always been quiet, observant. Unlike the others, she never chimed in with snide remarks or forced smiloos. When I spoke, she listened fully. And during that fateful family pitch 8 years ago, while the room mocked me, Florence had met my eyes, not with pity, with something closer to faith. A year into Luminary Labs' journey, I received a letter from Florence's lawyer. It was sealed in a plain white envelope addressed only to Mr. Ethan Reed, confidential. The letter was short and written in Florence's unhurried, elegant hand. "Ethan, they will never see you until you eclipse them. But I see you. I believe in what you're building. That's why I've revised my will. Upon my death, 60% of Carter Investments will transfer to your control. Use it wisely. Use it when you're ready. Love, Grandma." I stared at that letter for hours. Not because I wanted the power, but because she saw me when no one else did. I tucked it into the back of a locked drawer. It would remain hidden until the time was right. Florence passed away 18 months later. The family mourned publicly, grand tributes, high-profile funeral condolences in financial columns. I attended quietly alone, dressed in a dark coat. No one suspected the gravity of what she had left in my hands. And so while Carter Investments celebrated new acquisitions, I dismantled them from the shadows. A small gym in Portland, I helped it digitize operations and attract new members. Deal declined. A daycare in Tacoma, I rewrote their budgeting system, helped them triple their waiting list. No Carter deal, no headlines, just saved futures. Kelly knew we were doing something meaningful, but she never asked about the broader plan. She saw the results. She saw me working past midnight, fueled by more than spite. She once said, "You build like someone who's been broken." I smiled then, because I had. By the time Luminary Labs had turned 10 businesses around, Carter Investments had lost millions, and they had no idea it was me. That was the beauty of being invisible. You could become the knife that cut deepest. But something was shifting. The letters I received weren't just thank you notes. They were stories of rebirth, of single fathers putting kids through school, of veterans launching second careers. Every time I read one, I remembered Florence's words. Use it wisely. And I would, when the time came, not for vengeance, but for everyone who needed a second chance. That time, I felt, was drawing closer. Cracks in the dynasty. It started with whispers, a pattern of missed acquisitions of near-signed deals that mysteriously collapsed. At first, Carter Investments chalked it up to bad timing or market volatility. But then came the numbers, a quarter of projected takeovers lost to last-minute turnarounds. Alexander Reed, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, finally demanded answers. At a board meeting, he slapped a thick folder onto the polished mahogany table. "These were ours," he barked, "and yet time and again we lose to some ghost. Who is E. Reed Consultant?" Silence followed. No one knew. No one could trace the paper trail beyond P.O. boxes and encrypted emails. Raymond dismissed it as coincidence. Angela scoffed. "Probably some startup savior complex. Will outbid them next time." But Alexander wasn't convinced. He saw strategy, precision, a knife slicing through their empire without a name. He hired private investigators, cybersecurity experts. They all came back empty-handed. Meanwhile, I watched from my office above the city, sipping cold coffee while Kelly read aloud the latest acquisition Carter had failed to seal. "They're frustrated," she said, smirking. "Almost like someone's playing chess and they're still trying to learn the rules." I nodded, eyes fixed on the skyline. Let them keep guessing. But I knew the time for guessing was nearing its end. The next target was Parker Industries, a medical supply company in Tacoma, struggling, debt-ridden, and sitting on a gold mine of patented technology. Carter's pattern was clear. Offer a lifeline gut, the company flipped the assets. It was textbook predation. Alexander had staked his personal capital on the deal. This was his win, his proof he was still the family's sharpest mind, and it would be his greatest mistake. Kelly laid the documents on my desk. "They're moving fast. Lawyers, appraisers pressuring the board." I flipped through financial reports, saw the fear in Parker's numbers, but I also saw potential. They didn't need a buyer. They needed a shield. "Prep a strategy," I said. "We're taking this one head on." It was more than business now. It was a declaration. If I could turn Parker around before the ink dried on Carter's offer, it would expose the cracks in their dynasty. And maybe, just maybe, it would finally set the stage for everything Florence had trusted me to do. Back in the Carter boardroom, Alexander was growing paranoid. He dug through old files, tried connecting dots no one else believed existed. Angela rolled her eyes during his rants. Raymond ignored him, too busy lining up the next acquisition. But the cracks were spreading. Their empire, once invincible, was being unraveled from within, and the hand pulling the thread was mine. I spent sleepless nights planning the Parker campaign. Every scenario, every possible move Carter Investments might make, I countered. Kelly and I built predictive AI models, not just to help Parker streamline, but to anticipate sabotage. It was the most aggressive we'd ever been. Parker's CEO, Linda Myers, was skeptical at first. "Why would you help us?" she asked across the cluttered boardroom. I gave her the only honest answer I had. Because you shouldn't have to lose everything to a predator playing Monopoly with people's lives. I watched as her shoulders relaxed, her eyes softened. That moment reminded me why I'd started all this. The face behind the numbers, the stories behind the spreadsheets. Kelly forwarded me emails from Parker employees thanking us anonymously for giving their company a second chance. One read, "My husband and I were talking about selling our house. Now we have hope. I don't know who you are, but thank you." Another simply said, "I get to keep my job." I printed them, tacked them to my wall above the flickering light of our original coffee shop office photo. My war had started with revenge, but now I realized I was building something bigger than a grudge. Around that time, Florence passed away. The funeral was a quiet affair. I didn't speak. I watched from the back as my family took their turns remembering her through sterile anecdotes. None of them knew she'd left something behind for me. A week later, a letter arrived. Kelly handed it to me with a solemn face. It was from Florence's attorney, sealed in heavy cream paper. I opened it slowly, breath held. Inside, a brief note from her hand. "Ethan, you carry my spirit more than any of them. 60% of Carter Investments will be yours. Use it when the time is right, not for greed, for purpose." The letter shook in my hand. A part of me felt vindicated. Another part suddenly burdened. I had the key to dismantle their empire or rebuild it. And I wasn't sure which one I would choose yet. The reveal. The sun filtered through the high-rise windows of Luminary Labs' downtown Seattle office. The city buzzed below, oblivious to the showdown about to unfold. My fingers tapped lightly against the polished walnut of the boardroom table. Across from me, Kelly stood poised, folders perfectly aligned, nerves masked by her steady expression. "They're here," she whispered. The elevator dinged. Alexander entered first, impeccably dressed, jaw, clenched eyes, scanning for dominance. Angela followed, her heels clicking sharply on the tiles, her expression a cocktail of suspicion and confidence. Raymond trailed behind, his gaze tired, distracted. Timothy lingered at the back, head down, fiddling with his phone. None of them recognized the room, or me. They expected a faceless negotiator, some overpaid consultant delaying the inevitable. But today, masks were coming off. Alexander took the central chair across from me. "Let's keep this brief. Carter Investments is ready to finalize the Parker deal." Angela leaned in. "We know they're bleeding. 50 million, clean and fast. That's more than fair." I let the silence breathe before responding. The weight in the air was thick, full of years unsaid. I stood. "Good morning. I'm Ethan Reed, CEO of Luminary Labs, and I'll be leading this negotiation." Their reactions came like waves. Angela blinked. Timothy froze. Raymond slowly turned, confusion morphing into disbelief. But Alexander, he stiffened. His jaw clenched tighter. "What kind of game is this?" he growled. I opened the folder before me and slid the contents across the table. "Parker's financials. A 20% profit increase over the last quarter thanks to Luminary's AI intervention. They're not accepting your offer." Angela laughed, sharp and nervous. "This is absurd. You were a secretary." I met her gaze evenly. "I was your secretary. Now I'm the CEO who blocked every deal you tried to steal." Silence dropped like a stone. Raymond leaned forward. "This changes nothing. Parker's weak. We'll outbid you." "You already lost," I replied. "They've signed a strategic partnership with us." "You get nothing." Timothy looked pale. Angela stood suddenly, palms flat on the table. "You've been sabotaging us all these years, I nodded slowly. "Yes. The bookstore, the bakery, the brewery, every deal you thought slipped through your fingers, I was there. You mocked me, underestimated me, and I used your blind spots to build something real." Kelly stepped forward, placing a contract on the table. This is Parker's final declaration. Luminary Labs will oversee their operations for the next 5 years. Carter Investments is no longer welcome. Raymond looked away. Alexander's stare drilled into me, full of grudging realization. Then Kelly handed me another folder, the one I'd been waiting to unveil. Florence Reed's will, I said, laying it flat, sealed and notarized. Her 60% of Carter Investments goes to me. Angela recoiled. Liar, that's not possible. I didn't flinch. She believed in what I built. She watched, while you laughed, while you schemed. She chose me. Alexander gritted his teeth. We'll fight this. You can try, but you'll lose. The shares are mine. The board will follow, or I'll dismantle the company piece by piece. Timothy spoke for the first time, voice faint. Why didn't you tell us? Because you never would have heard me. Angela's voice cracked, furious and desperate. You think you've won? No, I think I've changed the rules and I'm just getting started. The room was still as I gathered my papers. You wanted Parker. You get nothing. You wanted to own the narrative, but now it's mine. And with that, I walked out, leaving their empire of pretense crumbling behind me. Florence's will. The room hadn't moved since I left it, just frozen stares and the soft buzz of disbelief. I returned not with vengeance, but with a purpose that ran deeper than ego. I'd never wanted to rule the Reed family or their empire. I only wanted the truth to rise. The lawyer's entrance cut through the tension like a scalpel. Ellen, Florence Reed's attorney, walked with quiet authority, a thick envelope in hand. This is the last will and testament of Florence Reed, she announced. Her calm voice was sharp against the ragged breathing around the table. Angela looked like she'd swallowed a stone. Alexander straightened in his seat, attempting stoicism. Raymond turned slowly, his fingers twitching. Ellen continued. Before her passing, Florence revised her estate. She named Ethan Reed as the inheritor of her personal 60% share in Carter Investments, effective immediately. Angela's chair screeched. This is betrayal. I turned to her slowly, voice clear, unwavering. You betrayed me first. Raymond's mouth opened, but no sound came. Timothy leaned back, blinking. 60%, that gives him control. It gives him leadership, Ellen corrected gently. Florence believed Ethan was the only one capable of steering Carter Investments back to integrity. Angela's fists clenched. She was old, confused. He manipulated her. You underestimate her even now, I said quietly. She watched all these years, saw what I built when none of you did. Ellen handed over a handwritten letter, sealed and aged. Florence requested this be read aloud if the will was ever contested. Kelly stood beside me as I opened it. Her presence grounded me. I read, Ethan. You were never invisible to me. You saw people, not profits. You built with heart. That is the legacy I dreamed of, not a tower of greed, but a bridge for others. If you are reading this, it's because I trust you. Not because of your name, but because of your vision. Make them see what I saw. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, but I held firm. Alexander spoke finally, voice ragged. You think you can destroy us from within. I don't want to destroy, I replied. I want to restore, but I won't let this company keep devouring the vulnerable, not anymore. Angela slammed her palm on the table. This is war. No, I said. This is justice, and a second chance for all of us if you're willing. I slid a proposal across the table. Reform the board, end predatory practices, partner with Luminary Labs to modernize with conscience, or I'll vote to dissolve and rebuild from scratch. They stared at the papers, thunderstruck. You wanted a legacy of power, I said. Florence wanted a legacy of purpose. Choose. Angela's face was flushed with fury. Raymond looked at the document, then at me, his jaw tight. Timothy whispered something unintelligible more to himself than to anyone else. The silence stretched taut and unbroken. Then Ellen spoke again, voice level. Florence's shares are non-revocable. This isn't a negotiation, it's a fact. Ethan is in control. Carol, who had sat silent this whole time, finally stirred. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. She never said anything to me. I turned to her gently. Maybe because you never asked Mom. Or maybe because she knew you wouldn't believe her either. She flinched, her gaze dropping. The echo of my childhood rose up briefly, the dinners where I was ignored, the conversations I was never part of. That silence, now deafening in retrospect, had shaped me more than any insult. Angela crossed her arms. You'll burn the company to the ground. Not if we do this together, I said. But I will burn the old ways, yes. No more silent acquisitions, no more draining communities for profit. Ellen stepped forward, placing a second envelope on the table. Florence also left a transition plan. She worked on it for over a year. This isn't a whim, this is her final design. I added, and I've spent the last 8 years building the tools to carry it out. Raymond's breath caught. So this has all been calculated. You used us. No, I said, my voice firm. I used what you taught me, how to see weakness, how to spot opportunity, but I redirected it toward protection, not plunder. Carol wiped a tear from her eye but didn't speak. It was the closest I'd ever seen her come to apology. I stood collecting the documents. Think it over. You have until tomorrow. Sign the reform plan or I'll initiate the board restructuring clause Florence wrote into the will. I won't ask twice. Angela stood too. You're tearing this family apart. I met her eyes, soft but unyielding. You tore it apart the day you decided status mattered more than connection. I walked out, Kelly following behind. The hallway echoed with the sound of my footsteps, no longer hesitant, no longer quiet. Behind me, the Reed empire cracked, not with a bang, but with the slow shudder of truth, finally given room to breathe. The goodbye. It didn't take long for the board to fold. Within 24 hours, every member signed the reform proposal, whether out of fear, obligation, or a faint hope that something salvageable could still rise from the ruins they yielded. And with those signatures, Carter Investments became something else. Something unfamiliar, something Florence would have recognized. But I knew I wasn't staying. The morning light flooded my new office, one that had belonged to Alexander just days earlier. The view of the skyline hadn't changed, but everything else had. I signed the final set of contracts formalizing the transfer of power and pushed the papers across the table to Ellen. She took them with a quiet nod. And now? She asked. Now, I said, I leave. Kelly looked up sharply. You're walking away. I smiled, tired but resolute. I didn't fight for this seat. I fought so no one else would have to beg for a voice at the table. Angela arrived minutes later, face pale. She hesitated at the threshold, then entered slowly. You win, she said flatly. It wasn't about winning. What was it about then? I paused. About showing you what we lost when we forgot people matter. Raymond followed, eyes averted. I was wrong, he muttered. You were more like Florence than any of us. I nodded. I know. Then Carol. She approached with slow, uncertain steps, her eyes searching mine. I failed you, she whispered. It took me a long time to respond. When I did, my voice was low, deliberate. I didn't fight to return. I fought to never need your approval again. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was freeing. The final cut that severed my need for validation from a family that had never truly seen me. Alexander didn't come. Later that day, I made my final appearance in the boardroom. I addressed the staff, the press, and the employees, many of whom had known me as a silent fixture in the background. Carter Investments is under new direction, I announced, but I won't be leading it. I've appointed an interim board. My time here is done. Gasps. Confusion. But I continued. I'm founding the Luminary Fund, a venture capital firm for underdogs, for dreamers who've been dismissed like I once was. Cameras clicked, reporters murmured, but all I heard was Florence's voice in my mind. Make them see what I saw, and I did. 6 months later, Luminary Fund had already backed 12 startups. All were led by individuals overlooked by traditional investors. Women immigrants, neurodivergent founders, veterans, people with fire in their veins and vision in their hearts. I traveled to meet them. I listened to their stories. I saw echoes of myself in their frustrations and hopes. One a former Marine building adaptive tech for disabled veterans. Another a single mother launching a mobile grocery solution in food deserts. Every investment was more than money. It was a vote of confidence in the underestimated. I kept the first thank you letter I received framed on my new office wall. It read simply, "Because of you, I didn't give up." That I realized was the only legacy worth building. I stood once more on a balcony, not the towering glass fortress of Carter Investments, but the modest open air of my new downtown office. The skyline still shimmered, but this time I wasn't looking at a city to conquer. I was looking at a future to nurture. And I was finally irrevocably free. The beginning. The ballroom looked different this time. Not because the chandeliers had changed or the gilded mirrors had dulled, but because I had. It had been a year since I walked out of Carter Investments. A year since I chose a path rooted in healing, not revenge. And today I was back on stage under the same glittering lights, but for a different reason. The annual West Coast Innovation Conference had invited me to speak. The room was filled with founders, developers, dreamers, and skeptics. My name was now associated with more than a mysterious consultancy or a tech rebellion. Luminary Fund had become a beacon for those left behind. As I stepped up to the podium, the crowd settled. Kelly stood just off stage, her eyes offering quiet encouragement. I cleared my throat and began. When I was younger, I was told I wasn't enough, not smart enough, not bold enough, not valuable enough. I was a secretary in a family of executives, a name without power. A pause. Faces leaned in. They laughed when I proposed an idea to change the world, and when I walked away from everything I knew, I did it not out of hate, but out of necessity. Because sometimes healing means stepping away from what breaks you. I spoke of Florence, her quiet belief in me, of the bakery I helped save, of the letters from people who reminded me that purpose is louder than pride. I didn't dismantle an empire to wear a crown. I did it to prove that kindness and clarity can be sharper than greed. The room was still. Some took notes. Others simply listened. I know many of you here have been told your dreams are foolish, that you're not the right fit, that you should quit. I was told that too. I let the moment breathe. But here's what I've learned: the people who laugh at you will look away when you rise until what you build is too real, too bright, too undeniable to ignore. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the room. I smiled. If they tell you you're nobody, let them laugh. Then build something so real they can't look away. Applause, long sustained, not for the drama but for the truth. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, share their stories. One man with trembling fingers told me he was planning to sell his code to a larger firm but changed his mind after hearing me. A woman said she was applying for funding again for the 7th time, this time with Luminary. I stood beneath the chandeliers one last time, no longer shadowed by the past. It wasn't an ending, it was only the beginning.